There is a sound a man never forgets once it has saved his life. It is not a roar. People who have never been under it think it is a roar like thunder or like a freight train, and they are wrong. It is a tearing. A long, flat, ripping noise as if the sky itself were a sheet of canvas and something with iron teeth had decided to pull it in half. By the time you hear it, the rounds are already in the ground. That is the part no one believes. The sound arrives after the work is done, late, like a witness who shows up to swear to a thing you have already lived through. I heard that sound on a frozen morning in the high country, in a notch between two peaks we called the Sabre, and I have been hearing it ever since. I am an old man now. My hands shake when the weather turns. But when a low gray sky presses down on the hills behind my house and the wind comes up out of the north, I stand on my porch and I wait for it, the way you wait for a voice you used to love. It does not come, of course. There are no gun jets over my county. There is only the memory and the woman who flew it, and the shame I carry for the days before I learned her name. Let me tell it the way it happened. Let me tell it honestly, which means I have to begin with myself and with what I was. I was a controller. The young men today have a longer word for it and a string of letters, but in plain speech my job was simple and terrible. When our soldiers were in a fight they could not win with the rifles in their hands, I was the man who talked to the aircraft. I lay in the dirt with a radio and a map and a pair of binoculars, and I told the pilots where the enemy was and where my brothers were, and the space between those two things was sometimes the width of a road and sometimes the width of a man's outstretched arms. I had been doing it for 9 years by the autumn I am telling you about. I had buried friends. I had made calls that worked and one or two that did not, and I do not speak of those, not even now. I thought I knew everything there was to know about the men who came out of the sky to help us. I thought I knew their kind. That was my sin, not cruelty. I was not a cruel man, my sin was that I was certain. We were based that season at a place called Forward Operating Base Renner, a scrape of gravel and wire and stacked containers thrown down in a bowl of brown mountains, with a single dirt strip that the engineers fought the weather to keep flat. It was late in the year. The first snows had already touched the peaks and were coming lower every week, and the valleys filled in the mornings with a cold white fog that did not burn off until 10 o'clock if it burned off at all. The fighting season was supposed to be ending. It was not ending. The enemy in that range did not read our calendars. Our task was an old one. There was a road that ran along the floor of the Dural Valley, a track really, a scar of mud and stone that the locals called the spine because of the way it humped over the ridges, and the enemy had been using it at night to move men and the makings of bombs north toward the towns. The brass wanted eyes on it. They wanted a small element up high, hidden, watching, ready to call down fire on anything that moved wrong. And the highest place with a clean line down onto the spine was the Sabre, the notch between the two peaks, a saddle of broken rock and stunted juniper at the very top of the world, cold as a grave with a view that ran for miles. I was to go with them, a platoon's worth of infantry, light, fast, climbing in at night to set the observation post before the fog lifted, and me with my radio to be their reach into the sky. The platoon belonged to a hard man named Roy Decker, a sergeant first class with 20 years on him and a face like a fist. Decker was the kind of soldier the army is built on and the kind it sometimes breaks itself against. He cared for his men the way a sheepdog cares for sheep, which is to say fiercely and without sentiment, and he trusted almost nothing he had not personally watched perform. He trusted his rifle. He trusted his medics. He trusted the men who had bled beside him. Everything else he held at arm's length until it proved itself, and a great many things never did. The trouble began 2 days before we walked in the planning tent, when we learned who our air cover would be. The air boss, a tired major named Hollies, ran down the assets the way a man reads a grocery list. There was a flight of fast jets out of the big base to the south, but they were committed and they were far, and everyone in that tent knew what far meant in the mountains. It meant minutes, and minutes were the currency we died in. There was a gunship that worked the nights but went home with the dark and could not live in daylight near those ridges. And then there was the close air, the slow stuff, the planes that flew low and ugly and stayed, and Holly said the name of the squadron and the call sign of the single aircraft that would be on station for us when we needed it most. Banshee, he said, a good airframe for that terrain. She can get down into the notch under the ceiling where the fast movers can't. He kept reading. It took a moment for the word he had used to land on us. Decker caught it first. She, Decker said. Hollies looked up. That's right. I remember the quiet in the tent. It was not a hostile quiet, not at first. It was the quiet of men recalculating, the way you recalculate when the bridge you meant to cross turns out to be made of rope. Somebody at the back, a young rifleman, laughed once, a short bark, and somebody else shushed him, and that was almost worse. The Warthog, Decker said. He said it the way you would say the name of an old farm truck. The ugly jet, and it's a woman flying it. It's the best low-altitude gun platform we have for that kind of close work, Hollis said, and there was an edge coming into his voice now, the edge of a man who has had this argument before and is sick of it. And Captain Briggs is the best stick in the squadron, by a distance. With respect, sir, Decker said, and when Roy Decker said with respect he meant the opposite. I'd rather have the fast movers on a tether and a gunship I can pray comes early than bet my boys on the slow jet. We get pinned up there, sir, in that cold. I need somebody who's going to come down into it and stay. Not somebody who's going to take one look at the tracers coming up and decide today's not the day. Hollis set down his grease pencil. You're telling me you want me to file to swap the asset. I'm telling you I want the asset I trust, Decker said. And here's the part I have to confess, because if I leave it out I am lying to you, and I promised myself a long time ago I would not lie about this. I agreed with him. Not out loud, not in those words, but in the place where a man keeps his real opinions. I nodded along with every syllable. I had lain in the dirt under fire enough times to have grown superstitious about who I wanted overhead, and in my superstition there was no room for surprises. I wanted the known thing. I wanted the loud, confident voice I had heard 100 times before. I told myself it was professional. I told myself it had nothing to do with anything but the mission. I was 31 years old and I believed I was a fair man, and I was wrong about myself in a way it would take a mountain and a great deal of someone else's courage to show me. Hollis filed the request to swap the asset. I know because he told us the next morning that it had been denied. There was no one else. The fast movers stayed committed, the gunship stayed nocturnal, and the slow, ugly jet with the woman in it stayed ours whether we liked it or not. I met her that same morning. I did not seek it out. I was crossing the flight line with my gear head down against a wind that had teeth in it, and I came around the tail of a parked aircraft and nearly walked into her. She was not what the jokes had built in my head. The jokes always build something, don't they? Some soft thing you can be unafraid of. She was nothing soft. She was perhaps 35, built lean and square, with the kind of weathered face you see on people who spend their lives squinting into glare, and pale eyes that did not blink as much as eyes are supposed to. Her flight suit was old and faded and salt-stained at the collar. She had a grease pencil behind one ear and a folded map in her hand, and she was walking the length of the jet slowly, running her bare fingertips along the leading edge of the wing, along the skin of the fuselage, pausing here and there the way a horseman runs his hand down a horse's leg, feeling for heat, for trouble, for the small wrong thing. The aircraft itself was a brute. Snub-nosed, painted the gray of a winter sky, scarred and patched, with that great cannon set into the nose like the snout of some animal that eats metal. It was, I will say it plainly, ugly. Decker had been right about that much. It was the ugliest aircraft I had ever stood beside, and there was something about the ugliness, the workmanlike, no-nonsense, all-business ugliness of it that I did not have the wit to understand yet. A crew chief was up on a ladder at the open canopy, an old master sergeant with a white mustache, and he was the one who spoke. "Captain, this is the controller going up with Outlaw Caro." She looked at me. The pale eyes went over me once, top to bottom, the way you read a map you have not seen before, and I had the distinct and unpleasant sensation of being assessed by someone better at it than I was. "Sergeant," she said, her voice was low and even, "you're the one who's going to be talking to me when it goes bad." "If it goes bad," I said. I do not know why I corrected her, some small need to push back. "Ma'am." "It'll go bad," she said, without any drama at all, the way you'd say it looks like rain. "You're going into the Sabre to sit on the spine. They've owned that road for 3 years. The minute the fog lifts and they spot your hide, they'll come up that east finger to push you off the high ground, and they'll come in numbers because they can't afford to let you stay." So, she unfolded her map on the cold metal of the wing and held it flat against the wind with one hand. "Show me where you mean to put your post. And show me your worst case. Where you go if they get inside the wire, and which way you'll be facing, and where you'll have your wounded, because that's the patch of ground I'm going to be threading a 30mm cannon past at 400 knots, and I'd like to know now and not over the radio with everyone shouting." I will be honest about what I felt standing there. I felt cornered. Her questions were better than my answers. They were the questions a man asks who has done this exact thing many times and watched it go wrong in many ways, and instead of being grateful I was resentful, the small ugly resentment of a man who has just realized he is not the most competent person at the table. I gave her what she asked for grudgingly in clipped words. I showed her the saddle, the east finger she had already named, the fallback among the rocks on the west side where we would put our backs to the cliff if it came to that. She marked all of it on her map in quick neat strokes and asked 2 more questions I had not thought of, and then she folded the map and put it away. "All right," she said, When you call, talk slow. Everybody talks fast when the rounds are coming. The ones who live talk slow. She looked at me a beat longer. I'll come when you call, whatever's coming up at me. I want you to believe that before you go up there because there's going to be a moment when you don't and I need you to make the call anyway. I said something? I do not remember what. Something non-committal, something with the word ma'am in it, something that gave away nothing of the doubt sitting in my chest like a cold stone. She nodded as if she had heard the doubt anyway, all of it, every word I had not said, and she turned back to her ugly jet and put her hand on its skin again. The old crew chief came down the ladder while I gathered my gear. He was a man of about 60 with the unhurried way of someone who has seen everyone come and go. "You don't know what you've got," he said to me quietly, wiping his hands on a rag. He was not angry, he almost smiled. "How's that, Master Sergeant?" "That stick," he nodded at her. "I've been on this line 11 years, I've launched a lot of pilots, some of them are good, a few of them are something else." He looked at me and the almost smile went away and what was under it was a kind of reverence I did not have any frame for yet. "She holds the record in this whole theater for the closest gun a man ever called for and lived. Lowest, slowest, tightest. There's a captain down south alive today who'll tell you she put a burst inside 30 meters of his position in a sandstorm on a guess, off the sound of his voice and never touched a hair on him. She has brought that airplane home with holes in it you could put your fist through. And in 9 years of this," he said, "she has never once, not one time, broken off a call when there were Americans in the open. Other pilots have, good men. The fire comes up at you, the airplane's screaming at you that it's hit, and any sane person turns for home. She doesn't turn." He folded the rag. "You go up that mountain thinking you got the short straw, you got the long one, son, you just don't know it yet." I climbed up to the Sabre that night thinking he was an old man in love with his airplanes. I climbed up thinking we had the slow jet and the woman, and I was carrying that thought like a stone in my boot, and I did not yet understand that the stone was me. The climb itself nearly killed us before the enemy got the chance. The Sabre sat above 10,000 feet and the air up there was thin and cruel, and we went up in the dark with the wind shrieking through the rocks and our breath freezing on the wool around our mouths. Men slipped on the ice and caught themselves and went on. We set the observation post in the gray hour before dawn, in a cluster of boulders on the saddle with a clean view down the east face to where the spine road snaked along the valley floor, and we settled in to wait and to watch and to freeze. The fog filled the dural below us like milk poured into a bowl. We lay in our hides and glassed the road through the breaks in it, and the cold came up through the ground and into our bones and stayed there. For most of that first day nothing happened, which is the truth of war that the films never tell you, the long gray nothing, the waiting, the cold. I made my radio checks. Banshee was not on station yet. She would launch and come on call when we needed her, that was the arrangement, and I confess I half hoped we would never have cause to call. Decker moved among his men, checking them, his hard face giving nothing away. We watched the road. We saw nothing but a goat herd and his animals and twice a battered truck grinding north, and we let them go because they were not what we were after and because to fire would be to give away our hide. It was the second morning that they found us. I have gone over it many times and I think it was the goat herd or someone like him, some pair of eyes on the valley floor that caught a flash of us against the rocks and carried word down the mountain. However it happened the way Captain Briggs had said it would, almost exactly, and I have never gotten over that, the way she had read the whole battle 2 days before from a folded map on the wing of an airplane. They came up the east finger. They came in the gray light just after the fog began to thin, and they came in numbers that took the breath out of me. More men than I had words for, swarming up that rocky spur in bounds, using the dead ground and the boulders, and the first we knew of it was a sentry's shout and then the whole world coming apart in noise. Machine gun fire poured up at our hide from positions on the finger that they had occupied in the dark while we slept in shifts. Rounds cracked off the boulders and filled the air with stone splinters. A man near me went down with a cry, then another. Decker's voice cut through it, hard and flat and calm, putting his men into their positions, getting fire going back down the finger, and the noise doubled and doubled again until it was a single roaring wall of sound. I got on the radio. I called for the fast movers first because that is what you do, you call for everything. The answer came back through the static and the answer was the answer I had dreaded since the planning tent. The weather. The ceiling had dropped over the whole range in the night, the valley was socked in solid, the fast jets to the south could not get down into the dural, could not see the floor of it, could not come below the cloud into those mountains without flying blind into a wall of rock. They would come if they could find a hole. They were not going to find a hole. The gunship was 100 miles away and would not survive the daylight near those ridges even if it could reach us in time, which it could not. Every fast, loud, confident thing I had wanted overhead was a closed door. There was one door that was not closed. I want you to understand the moment, because it is the center of everything I am telling you. the hinge the whole rest of my life has turned on. I lay in the rocks with stone chips cutting my face and a man bleeding out 10 feet away and Roy Decker shouting the range to a target, and I had in my hand the means to call down the one aircraft that could fly under that ceiling and into that notch, the slow, ugly jet with the woman in it, and for one full second with my brothers dying around me. I hesitated because of what I had decided about her in a planning tent 2 days before, because I had told myself a story about who came out of the sky to save men and she did not fit the story. I am ashamed of that second. I will be ashamed of it until I die. And then I keyed the radio and I called her and I made myself say it slow because she had told me to, and that small instruction, talk slow, the ones who live talk slow, was the thread I held on to as I gave her the worst news a controller can give. Troops in contact, danger close, position about to be overrun. Her voice came back and it was the calmest thing in that entire screaming world. Outlaw Banshee, I have you, I'm 3 minutes out and coming down to you, talk to me. 3 minutes? In a firefight 3 minutes is a geological age. We did not have 3 minutes, we had whatever fraction of them the enemy chose to give us, and they were giving us nothing, they were closing. The fire was walking up the finger toward our hide, and I lay there and talked to her slow, the way she had told me while the world ended around us. I gave her the lay of it. The finger to the east, alive with them, our hide on the saddle, our wounded gathering against the rocks on the west side with the cliff at their backs, exactly the worst case she had asked me to map for her 2 days before on the cold skin of the wing. She knew the ground. She had made me show her the ground, and now, with no time at all to learn it, she already had it. I'm under the ceiling, she said. It's ugly down here, I've got you visual, I see your smoke, say the friendly mark. We threw a smoke grenade and I told her the color and she read it back. And then she said the thing that I have carried for the rest of my days, said it flat and certain, no drama, the same voice she'd used to tell me it looks like rain. I'm going to run east to west right along the lip of that finger. Get your heads down, this is going to be close. I did not have to tell the men, they had heard it on the net. We pressed ourselves into the frozen ground, into the rocks, smaller than we had ever been, and the slow, ugly jet that nobody had wanted came down out of the gray ceiling into the notch of the saber, into a space between two mountains that no sane pilot would fly a fast aircraft into, low and slow and steady, into the teeth of every weapon on that finger turning up to meet it. And then I heard the sound. I told you at the start what it is. It is not a roar. It is a tearing, a long flat ripping of the sky, and by the time you hear it the work is done. The cannon in the nose of that aircraft fired and the entire east finger, the whole rocky spur boiling with men who were 30 seconds from being inside our position, vanished into a churning wall of stone, dust and smoke and pulverized rock. She walked it the length of the finger, east to west, exactly as she had said, a ripping line of impacts that came so near our hide that the dust of it rained down on my back and I felt the heat of it on my neck, and not one round of it, not one, touched an American. The fire coming up the finger stopped. It did not slacken. It stopped the way a sound stops when you cover your ears, total and sudden, replaced by the dwindling tear of the cannon and then the rising scream of the engines as she hauled the jet up and around for another pass. Outlaw Banshee, how's that? Talk to me. I could not talk for a moment, none of us could. And then Decker's voice came across the net, Roy Decker, who 2 days before had stood in a tent and asked for anyone but her, and his voice was not the same voice. It had something in it I had never heard from him. Banshee Outlaw, he said, hit them again, same line, they're regrouping in the draw at the base of the finger. Coming around, she said. That was the first of 11. I'm going to tell you about the 11 because they were not one miracle. A miracle is a thing that happens to you. What that woman did over the saber for the next 40 minutes was not a thing that happened to us. It was a thing she did deliberately over and over at a cost that mounted with each pass, and the difference between those two things, the miracle and the work, is the whole difference between a story and the truth, and I am trying to tell you the truth. The enemy did not break after the first run. They were too many and they wanted that high ground too badly. They pulled back into the dead ground and the draws where the cannon could not easily reach them, and they brought up their own weapons against the aircraft, heavy machine guns dug into the rocks. And on her second pass I saw the tracers come up at her, lazy-looking streams of light that I knew were anything but lazy, reaching for the slow jet as it bored in. She flew through them. She did not jink or climb away. She held the airplane steady on its line because steady was what put the rounds where my brothers needed them, and she fired again. And again the finger erupted, and again it came down danger close, closer than any manual would ever permit, close enough that I called the corrections in a voice I kept slow by main force. And she made them, fine adjustments of meters, threading that fearful cannon along the margin between the enemy and my wounded. On the third pass they hit her, I saw it. I saw a piece come off the airplane, a bright flash on the wing and a spray of something, and the engine note changed, took on a rough edge, and I keyed the radio with my heart in my throat to tell her to break off, to go home, that we would manage. The old crew chief's words were in my head. She doesn't turn. I did not believe him still, not even then, not even after the first 2 runs. I thought, now she turns. Now any human being turns. I started to say it. I'm fine, she said before I could. Flat, calm. Lost a little off the left side. She still shoots. Where do you want it? Where do you want it? As if she were a carpenter asking where to drive the nail. As if there were not smoke trailing from her wing and a mountain full of men trying to kill her. I gave her the next target because she asked me to, because she had made it clear that the only way I could fail her was to stop calling, and she came around again with her wounded airplane and put the cannon exactly where I asked. The 4th pass and the 5th held them off the saddle while Decker's medics dragged the worst of our wounded back to the rocks on the west side. The 6th broke up a rush that came at us through a gully on the south, a rush we never even saw coming, that she saw from above and called out to us and then erased before it reached us. The 7th and 8th she flew low and slow over our position itself, not firing, just showing herself, that great ugly snarling shape passing low over the saddle so that every enemy on that mountain knew the gun jet was still up there and still hunting. And I learned that day that an aircraft can hold ground with its presence alone, that the mere fact of her overhead, alive, unbroken, refusing to leave, was worth as much as the cannon. By the 9th pass she was low on fuel and low on ammunition, and the left engine was failing in earnest. I could hear it in the rough, uneven scream of her run-ins, and I could see the smoke thicker now, a gray rope of it trailing behind the jet against the gray sky, so that I sometimes lost her in her own smoke, and then she would come tearing out of it lower than before. The quick reaction force was on its way up to us now, fighting up the backside of the Sabre to reach us, and everything depended on holding the enemy off the saddle for the 20 minutes it would take them to arrive, and there was nothing to hold them with but her. Banshee, you've got to be bingo, I said. Bingo is the word for the fuel that gets you home. Past bingo there is no home. You've got to go. We'll hold. You can't hold, she said, and it was not unkind, it was just true, and we both knew it. QRF's 20 out. You don't have 20 minutes of ammunition down there, and neither do they coming up. I've got 2 more passes in the gun and a little more than that in the tanks if I'm careful. A pause, the engine rough behind her voice. I'm not careful. Mark your front line for me. I'm going to put the last of it right on the edge of you. The 10th pass came down so close that I have never been able to fully describe it to anyone who was not there. She put the cannon on the lip of our own position, on the rocks not 15 meters from where Decker and his men crouched over their wounded, because that is where the enemy had finally got to, that close into the very mouth of our hide, and there was no longer any margin to thread. There was only the choice to fire on the edge of us or to watch us be overrun, and she fired on the edge of us. The dust of it covered us completely. For 3 or 4 seconds I could see nothing at all, only churning gray, and I lay there in it certain that she had finally, at the end, after all of it, made the one mistake, that she had cut it too fine, and that I would lift my head to find my brothers gone. And then the dust thinned and we were all still there, every one of us still there, and the enemy at the mouth of our hide was not. The 11th pass was empty. She had no more ammunition. She came around one final time, low and slow, the dying left engine streaming smoke, and she flew the length of the saddle directly over the heads of the enemy in the rocks below, an unarmed pass, a bluff, a slow, ugly, snarling shape daring them to come out of cover while her cannon was silent. And they did not come out because they did not know it was silent, because she had taught them for 40 minutes to fear that sound and that shape, and that fear bought us the last 5 minutes. And at the end of the last 5 minutes the quick reaction force came over the back of the Sabre with 100 fresh rifles, and the thing was done. Outlaw Banshee, she said. Her voice had changed at last, just slightly, just a fraying at the edge of the calm that told me how much it had cost to keep it smooth for 40 minutes. Friendlies are on your 6. I'm out of gun and just about out of airplane. I have to take her home now if I can. If I can. Those were the only 2 words of doubt I ever heard from her, and they were not about courage. They were about whether the broken machine would carry her back over the mountains. I keyed the radio and I tried to say something worthy of what she had just done, and there were no words for it. There are still no words for it, and what came out of me was small and inadequate, and the truest thing I have ever said into a radio. Banshee Outlaw, thank you, get home, please get home. Copy, she said. Banshee's off station. And the slow, ugly jet that we had tried to send away climbed up into the gray ceiling, trailing its rope of smoke, and was gone, and the sound of its dying engine faded over the peaks until there was nothing left on the Sabre but the wind and the moaning of our wounded and the long ringing silence that comes after a battle, when you cannot quite believe you are still alive to hear it. We brought our wounded down off that mountain. We brought all of them down. We did not leave a man, living or dead, on the Sabre, and that was because of her, every one of them. That was her doing. The walk down took the rest of that day and into the night, and I do not remember much of it, only the weight of the litter on my shoulder and the cold and the great hollow space inside me where my certainty used to be. Somewhere on that mountain on one of those 11 passes, the man I had been, the certain man, the man who had nodded along in a planning tent, had died, and a different man was carrying the litter, and the difference was her. She made it home. I did not know it until we got back to Renner the next morning, gray with exhaustion, and the first thing I did, the very first thing before I had eaten or slept or seen to my own gear, was walk out onto the flight line to find out whether the woman who had saved my life was alive. The jet was there, they had it pulled off to the side of the strip, and the old crew chief with the white mustache was up on his ladder again, and I understood when I got close why they had moved it off the line. It should not have flown. I have looked at a great many damaged aircraft in my life, and I have never seen one that should not have flown the way that one should not have flown. The left engine was a black ruin. The wing was holed in a dozen places, the skin peeled back and torn, and there were strikes along the fuselage and the tail, and the great snub nose with the cannon in it was scorched and battered, and it sat there on its landing gear ticking as it cooled, an ugly broken brute of an airplane that had flown 11 times into the teeth of a mountain full of men because there were Americans in the open and she did not turn. There was a crowd at the wire. I had not expected that. Word had come down off the mountain ahead of us, the way word does, and by the time the litters reached Renner the whole base seemed to know what had happened up on the Sabre, and they had come out to the edge of the flight line, the cooks and the mechanics and the clerks and the off-shift soldiers and the men of Decker's platoon, the ones who could still stand, and Decker himself, and they stood at the wire in the cold gray morning and they were silent. Nobody was talking. That is the thing I remember most. There is always talk. Soldiers talk. It is how we keep from feeling things, and there was no talk at all, only a crowd of hard, tired men standing very still in the cold, watching the canopy of that broken airplane, waiting. She climbed out slow. She was stiff. You could see that the 40 minutes had gone into her body as well as into the airplane, that she ached in every joint, and she came down the ladder one careful rung at a time and stood on the gravel beside the wreck of her jet and pulled off her helmet, and her hair was matted with sweat under it, and her face was gray and hollowed out, and her pale eyes were red-rimmed, and she stood there small beside the great ugly machine and looked at the crowd at the wire with the wary, braced expression of a person who has spent a career being looked at the wrong way and is waiting to find out which way it will be this time. And Roy Decker stepped out from the crowd. I held my breath. We all did, I think, the men who knew what Decker had said in the planning tent 2 days before, the men who had asked command for a different pilot. Decker walked across the gravel toward her, that hard fist of a face giving nothing away, 20 years of soldier in every step, and he stopped in front of her at a proper distance, and for a moment the two of them simply looked at each other, the woman who had not turned and the man who had wanted to send her away. The wind came up off the strip. Nobody moved. Then Roy Decker came to attention. He brought his boots together on the gravel with a crunch you could hear across the whole silent flight line, and he raised his hand to the brim of his cap in a salute so crisp and so deep that it was not really a salute anymore. It was something older than a salute. It was a man giving away every piece of the certainty he had carried for 20 years, and he held it. He did not snap it down. He held it, and his eyes, those hard eyes, were not hard anymore. And then behind him the whole wire came to attention. Not on a command, there was no command. The cooks and the mechanics and the clerks, the off-shift soldiers, the men of the platoon, the ones on crutches and the ones holding themselves up against the wire, every one of them came to attention in the cold and raised a hand to her. 100 men and more, in a silence broken only by the wind and the ticking of the cooling jet, and they held it, and they held it, and the woman they had not wanted stood in the middle of all of it with her helmet under her arm and her gray, exhausted face. And she did the only thing left for her to do. She came to attention herself, and she returned it to all of them, to the whole wire, and there were tears standing in her red-rimmed eyes that she did not let fall and did not wipe away, because she was a soldier and she would not break even then, not even in the face of that, the one thing harder to stand under than enemy fire, which is the sudden full weight of 100 men's respect arriving all at once. I learned later what Decker did that afternoon. He went to the air boss, to Major Hollies, and Hollies told me about it years afterward, when we were both old and the war was long over and we found ourselves at the same table at a reunion neither of us had wanted to attend. Decker had brought with him the original request he had filed 2 days before, the request to swap out the asset, to send away the woman in the ugly jet. He had carried it down off the mountain in his pocket. And he laid it on Hollies' table, and in front of the air boss he tore it in half and then in half again, and then he asked for a pen. And on a clean sheet of paper he wrote out and signed a statement that for as long as he led men in those mountains he would fly no mission, plan no operation, take no element into the field without that pilot and that aircraft on call above him, and that any officer who tried to give him different could come and explain it to him personally. He signed his name to it, Roy Decker, Sergeant First Class. And then Holly said the hardest man in the battalion stood in the air boss's tent and could not speak for a while, and Hollies had the good sense to let him stand there until he could. I never flew with her again. The army is large and the war moved us both. And our paths crossed only that once on the Saber in the cold. I do not know what became of her in the end. I have looked, the way you look for someone who saved you and then walked back into the great anonymous machine of the service. I hope she is alive. I hope she is on a porch somewhere like mine, watching a gray sky come down over some hills, an old woman now with hands that shake when the weather turns. I hope someone tells her sometimes what she was. Because here is what she was, and it is the thing I climbed that mountain too certain to understand. She was not the slow jet, she was not the ugly airplane or the wrong choice or the short straw. She was the long straw. The old crew chief had it exactly right. She was the long straw and we did not have the wit to know it. And the reason we did not know it was that we had decided who came out of the sky to save men before we ever bothered to look. We had a story and she did not fit the story, and so we tried to send her away, and she came anyway 11 times into the teeth of a mountain, and she did not turn. I have told this to my grandchildren. They are too young yet to understand all of it, the part about my shame, the part about the certainty that is the real enemy, the one inside the wire. But they understand the airplane, and they understand the sound, and when the wind comes up out of the north and a gray sky presses down on the hills behind my house, the littlest one will sometimes come and stand beside me on the porch and look up the way she has seen me look up, and she will ask me what I am listening for. I am listening for a tearing in the sky. I am listening for the long, flat ripping noise that arrives late after the work is done, like a witness who comes to swear to a thing you have already lived through. I do not expect to hear it again in this life. But I stand there anyway, an old man on a cold porch, and I keep the watch because once on a frozen morning in a notch called the Saber, when I had given up and the certain man inside me had no answers left, a woman I had wronged came down out of the gray to save my life and stayed and did not turn, and the least I can do for whatever years I have left is listen for her. That is the whole of it. That is what she was. And if you ever hear that sound, that tearing in the sky, I hope you have the wit I did not have. I hope you look up, and I hope you do not decide before you look who it is that has come.